All right, welcome back to the Finance and Tech Exchange. I'm Sean, the cybersecurity guy, IT on this side of the conversation. We have here with us Viviana, who does everything when it comes to tax strategy and creating financial systems for your business. This week, we are talking about a very specific topic called cleanups. And no, I'm not talking about cleaning up your house, but more along the lines of your books or the data that's found in your financial system. And that's what we're going to start talking about. So let's get right into it with Viviana.
Hi, everyone. So, yeah, cleanups. Oh my God, I spent quite a bit of time in this topic, Sean, over the last, I would say, decade. So, like I said in the last episode, I could talk a lot about it. But a lot of times people think cleanups, they think bookkeeping, think records, they think taxes, but they don't relate that with, for example, how many nights have a business owner laying awake wondering if there will be enough for payroll.
Mhm.
I I have talked to so many business owners who, who always wondering about this subject. And often the answer lies on having a system that can answer that question, and not the week that you're doing payroll, but weeks ahead of time. I just want to share what I have seen and why owners need to see their financial system from a different perspective. That's
Yeah,
kind of what I want to talk today about.
gotcha. All right. So, all right. So, I think a good place to start is what essentially is a cleanup when you're talking about cleanups.
Yeah, so when I talk about cleanups, I'm talking about having actual data that drives your decisions. Unfortunately, when we think about decisions, right, when you're running your business, you're making decisions on a day to day basis, week to week basis. And a lot of times you're making those decisions based on your gut, right? Or a lot of times just by opening your bank account and your app from the bank and just looking at what you have there. And unfortunately, you're not making your decisions based on actual facts. S- And the reason for this is when they think on their financial system or their records, or essentially they only think and look on those for when they have to do taxes. And not every business, I know a lot of businesses should have a financial team, they have bookkeepers, but unfortunately, what happens is they often look at those financials like a month later or even just a year. And and a lot of times that's not giving them the information they need. Now, the sad part about it is a lot of times when they look at the numbers of these financials, it doesn't match to what they have experienced in their business. And a lot of times the reason lays because there's a lot of errors and missing transactions. It just they don't add up to what they feel, what they have seen in their day-to-day operations. So a lot of business owners think about your books aren't like they look at it as a tax check, or I just have to do it for taxes. But in reality, they should be the place that you look before you make a financial decision.
Okay. So when owners are or want to know what the cleanup is gonna do specifically, are we talking about really just software? "Hey, I have to clean up, so I just have to clean up my Sage or my QuickBooks or Xero," whatever they're using.
Yeah, so a lot of times people think about their financial system and they just think about QuickBooks Online or Xero. The problem is not the software. A lot of time the problem comes from people. For example, owners may be running their own books, but the problem is they were never trained to understand what QuickBooks is doing behind the scenes. Back in the day, we used to have ledgers, right? And actually write things. So QuickBooks is doing a lot of things behind the scenes. But if you're not trained, you're not going to spot errors. And unfortunately, I have seen this with a lot of bookkeepers as well. And also with even tax preparers. And not because they don't understand accounting, they do, but they may not understand fully what Online is doing. I have experienced a lot, or have talked to a lot of experienced bookkeepers who were trained in QuickBooks Desktop. And once they move to QuickBooks Online, it's a totally different story. And tax preparers as well. They are great in preparing taxes, but they never were trained in QuickBooks Online. So it's a little bit of both, right? It's a little bit of understanding how it works, especially if you're using QuickBooks Online, what's happening behind the scenes, and also, want business owners to look at their books, not just for tax purposes, but actual system. It has to work. It's like a financial system that it works. And you have to stay on top of it to ensure it's producing the right numbers that you need to make those decisions.
Gotcha. So if a business owner, let's say he starts up his business, whatever it is, doesn't matter, installs QuickBooks Desktop or uses QuickBooks Online, sees a few videos, goes to YouTube University, goes headfirst into QuickBooks, gets it all set up, I guess more or less thinks he or she has it working properly. What are the most common mistakes you see with that situation? Being that person, like you said, because I think you said even bookkeepers sometimes make mistakes using QuickBooks because they don't understand, I guess, how it integrates with the accounting system in general, the accounting principles, specifically to QuickBooks, or I guess Xero may have a similar situation too. But so, what are the more common mistakes you see when it comes to that situation?
Yeah, so, going back to what you mentioned about the bookkeepers, every bookkeeper has a different level of experience. So I can just tell you from my experience, when I moved from QuickBooks Desktop onto QuickBooks Online, it took me a little bit of a learning curve to understand how QuickBooks was different from QuickBooks Desktop. And that's when I refer about the bookkeepers. Sometimes we make mistakes, and that's why it's important that there's like a layer of review in every system. And to answer your question about what are the most common mistakes I see in the books, one is income counted twice. And a lot of times this could happen because of integrations with third-party softwares.
Mhm.
So for example, you using Shopify, you using Housecore Pro, you using Service and this is just some of the softwares that business owners use to invoice their clients. So then what's happening is that software is connecting to QuickBooks. And what happens is the software a lot of times does a data dump to QuickBooks, or the integration wasn't done correctly. So a lot of times this create essentially your income to be double. That's one of the mistakes I see the most, or missing income, or there's something not right connected. And that
Mhm.
obviously, if you have your income counted twice, the consequence of that is just going to pay more in taxes. Another mistake I see is expenses booking correctly. Even sometimes I have seen where they have booked an expense as income, or the other way around, income as a expense. You'll be surprised, but I have seen it all. I also see a problem a lot with payroll recorder run. This is a big one, and unfortunately, this essentially mislead the business owner in their payroll and planning for their forecast, where they need to hire someone or something. They're making decisions on their run information. Also, I have seen, I already spoke a little about the integration break. If you have QuickBooks connected to a third party software, you need to have a good system to make sure they're communicating correctly. And it's not just something you do at once, you have to do this at least monthly, if not weekly. Another one that I see a lot is assets and liabilities not being recorded correctly. And I'm going to go back again to some bookkeepers and in general. Sometimes they only look at the bank accounts and credit cards. They're not looking at the whole balance sheet. And a lot of times it's still because that they only hire for that portion. They're not really hired to prepare the whole balance sheet. And one that is huge is the equity in the books. They're not being closed correctly. And a lot of times this is tied back to even the tax preparer because the tax preparer prepares the books and a lot of times they don't even touch QuickBooks. So I have seen a lot of books where the equity is not never being closed. So pretty much it's very unclear. It's like the business owner doesn't have visibility
Mhm.
on their financials. So to sum this out, I would say if you have something connected to QuickBooks, oversight is important. Even if you have a bookkeeper, you want to make sure there's an oversight in the process. There's always two people looking at the books. Even myself, I make mistakes, and we have a team that makes sure we cover each other. That's key because one mistake can cost you a lot of money.
And when you said oversight, so what would the typical business owner use as far as oversight? Because let's say, for an example, which I've seen in some cases, construction company has a bookkeeper slash reception person that kind of knows a little bit about QuickBooks and does all the numbers and all that good stuff. If that person were to need some oversight, or you're recommending have oversight, would it be, I guess, realistic for the company to hire someone else to maybe do an inspection of those books and see if everything is in order? Is that what you recommend typically in that situation?
Yeah, and what I recommend is there shouldn't be just one person doing everything. There
Mhm.
should be
Okay.
two people. So one person should be doing the categorization and the review, and then there should be a second review process to happen. But if there's only one person, there should be a review every month. Not looking at the books, just not like reconciliation part, but reviewing the P&L, reviewing the balance sheet, reviewing the cash flow statement, just making sure everything is where it needs to be. If there's not a review, then you're gonna find mistakes. So what I recommend is you have an in-house bookkeeper that you can hire someone that can review your books on a monthly basis, just making sure everything is good, or involve the tax preparer to have your tax preparer maybe have those quarterly meetings with them so that they can review your numbers and they can explain it to you and they can plan with you how your business is doing for that year. So definitely not relying on just one system. You want to have multiple layers of protection set up.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate that explanation. And I think also let's see here on the show notes, you mentioned there was an example of this $121,000 near miss situation. Can you just briefly mention what this issue is here or what happened?
Yeah, the reason why I put it in the notes is because I want to give an example so that business owners out there can see the importance. Unfortunately, nowadays they just see it like as a cost to their business rather than an investment. And a lot of times what they're lacking is they're actually spending more money if they would have just have a good system and a good team supported them. So for example, the book said that 597,000 in net income. So the real number after the cleanup, the real net income was 245,000, not 597. And when you think about it, this is a profit that never existed. But if we would have filed taxes with that number, would have paid 121,000 additionally to what actually needed to pay. So it would have been a miss of 121,000. So
Mm,
again, when you put it in perspective, think again. If there's a mistake and you are booking income incorrectly, that's gonna result in paying more than you that essentially you earn. So it's gonna cost in the long run. If this company wouldn't have hired us, they would have had a huge tax bill that they didn't have to pay.
right.
Can never emphasize enough the importance of having a good team by your side doing these reviews.
Yeah, and I think amongst other things we talked about, because I've heard you talk about it before. Sometimes companies end up overpaying taxes, try to take out some loans to maybe grow the business, and then the banks are now asking more detailed information. They're like, "Hey, what do you want to know? How much is your company value, or the valuation of your company?" And they're just like, "Yeah, we don't know." And I think that goes back to what you're saying, I guess the cause and effect of not really treating the cleanups seriously or having your financial data spotless, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's the way I interpret it based on what you're telling me.
Yeah, and this is essentially three things why you want to have a good financial system and a good team in your side. So one, we already cover overpaid taxes, right? That essentially is the biggest one. You're leaving money on the table, you're overpaying. The other thing that I see too is loans being denied or having a wrong valuation in your business. So like say you want to sell your business today, if you have wrong records, they're not gonna give you what your business is worth. Two, you may not get approved on loans because your records not reflect the right numbers. So, and then the last one is like I said, you if you want to grow your business, if you're making decisions based on wrong data, you're driving blindsided. So every business decision starts with one thing, good information. That cannot emphasize that enough.
Gotcha. How would you want to, I guess, close up this conversation regarding cleanups? And what would be the most
Yeah.
beneficial thing for business owners to think about?
So one thing I want to emphasize is cleanups. Yeah, it's cleaning up back data, but essentially you want to make sure you stay up to date. And when I mean this is you want to make sure you are reviewing your books not once a year and not every 3 months, not monthly, but in some cases weekly, because a mess can happen in a week. Imagine in a few months. So you want to stay on top of it. And when I say on top of it, if you do what I'm doing right now with my advisor clients, we're actually doing weekly reviews where we actually go in, review their cash flow, spending, make sure everything looks good, and we provide an actual report to them so they can understand what happened to their cash. And then monthly, we review their financials to understand their margins, spot any trends, and then quarterly, we review them to see what is their tax projection or their tax position. So my advice is stay on top of your numbers. Make sure you have a team that review your numbers, ideally monthly, at least monthly, but ideally weekly.
Okay. Next week, the topic of discussion is going to be what in regards to the finance?
We are going to talk, I would like to talk about this one, which is a huge one
Mm.
that I see a lot, which is separating business and personal finances. But
Mm.
for real this time. This is a good one, and I want to go over about why it's important and why you shouldn't overlook it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. That's having a few friends with their own businesses. I've had those discussions before. There's definitely sometimes a mixed view on what's personal, what's business. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say about that. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap it up then with this week's episode on the finance portion of things, and stay tuned for next week about we'll get to hear about that topic. And if this information was beneficial for you or for maybe a friend that you have that's running their own business, please share with them. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. So that way we can use this information to help others as well. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.